If, on the contrary, the guards saw the sword coming and did not sound the trumpet, so the people were not warned, and the sword struck them, those who fall will die because of their iniquity, but I will demand their blood from the one who was supposed to keep them.
My daughter, now I will make my true people aware of the main facts before the great days of rest, to be published in France, in those places where good and bad are found. I do not want to mix these announcements with the great days. It would be too late to warn my people.
Saint Michel, you won't let that happen?
Acronym. It is the Lord who sends me and charges me with all these warnings. I am obliged to obey.
Acronym. I too would rather not hear that, but like you, I want to obey.
We too would prefer never to have heard what is contained in this book, but since the Lord commands it to be published in France, so that it reaches his true people and warns them before it is too late, how could we not obey? However, when publishing the book of the Colloquies of Heaven with Marie-Julie, we had set a line of conduct. If this book, Les Colloques, which contains the beginning of quite frightening announcements, does not attract within 6 months requests for clarification from religious authorities, we will consider this lack of spontaneous reactions as encouragement to publish entirely what Marie-Julie announced nearly a century ago. If the authority had intervened spontaneously, it has the duty to know what is published, we would have complied with its formal orders, and thus our responsibility would have been discharged. The difficulty was in making a choice among the countless texts of ecstasies and arranging them in a logical order. We could have broken the ecstasies and reconstructed, with short fragments, a story that keeps the reader in suspense. But this literary device does not seem to be in the Lord's style, and it might have risked distorting everything. We preferred to proceed with broad tables and to overview, overall, the general course of events. This allows us to move forward in familiar territory, like strolling, always discovering new elements, touch by touch, completing the whole. We refrain from any significant comment. We assume the reader is smart enough to interpret what needs to be interpreted. As in the Gospel, not everything may be taken literally. Thus, when the Lord advises to pluck out the eye that causes scandal and cast it away, we know well that it cannot mean mutilating oneself. When it is said to take refuge under the chestnut tree, one might not think that only those who can physically shelter themselves under a tree, or even under shelters, will be protected. When we talk about a flood, it's not about a new flood of water, like in Noah's time. We say it because we were told to believe it. If we deliver these texts to the friends of Marie-Julie, who requested them from us, with such insistence, it is not our place to explain or clarify them. We are providing material for everyone to reflect upon. Encore 40 jours, criait Jonas, et Ninive sera détruite. Les Ninivites firent pénitence, et Ninive ne fut pas détruite. Marie-Julie screams like Jonah. Will our contemporaries repent like the Ninevites? Heaven forbid that it should be, and the world will be spared. But will it be? Abbreviated Life of the Stigmatized of Blain. We think it would be helpful to include at the beginning of this book a summary of the life of Marie-Julie Jahenny. Not everyone interested in her prophecies may have read her biography, published in 1972. These few preliminary pages will help to assess the terrible content of this work, childhood and youth. Here, copied from the baptismal record of the future, stigmatized. On February 13, 1850, Marie-Julie Jahenny was baptized, born the day before, in Coyo, from the legitimate marriage of Charles Jahenny and Marie Boyer. Godfather, François Jahenny. Godmother, Jeanne Boyer. Only the godfather signs. Sin, L'Escudron, Vicar. Coyo is a hamlet of Blain, a few kilometers from the town, heading towards Saffray. The parents of little Marie-Julie lived there in a room adjacent to the home of her paternal grandparents, François Jahenny and Jeanne Duguay. There is another son, brother of Charles, Pierre, who married in 1850 and also stays with his parents at Coyo. On July 5, 1853, a second child was born in the household of Charles Jahenny, a boy named Charles after his father. There are too many people for too little land, and it will become a nest of quarrels. Something else must be found. A small farm will become available at La Fraudais, 4 kilometers from Coyo by the shortest route. 3 cows can be fed there, and even 4. The lease is concluded for 250 francs annual rent. Thus, the Fraudais cottage, which has hardly changed since, will be chosen to become the site of significant manifestations from heaven. The house has never become the property of the family. It is barely that, later on, Charles Jahenny will be able to buy 2 hectares to join his meager rented lands, which will make it easier for him to raise his 4 children. In reality, the household had 5 children, but little Rose hardly lived, and her death was the occasion of great sorrow for the eldest, who was simply called Marie at home. On August 31, 1857, Angèle was born, the future confidant of Marie-Julie. Finally, on March 28, 1862, Jean was born, who would die last, almost a centenarian. Mother Jahenny has her hands full with her brood, and still, she must help the father with the fieldwork. Marie, her eldest daughter, supports her wholeheartedly and according to her strength. For her, there is no question of school. However, as she approaches her first communion, she will be sent to school for 6 months to help her learn her catechism better. If Marie-Julie has never learned to write, at least she will manage to read, painfully and hesitantly, the only printed writing. The future stigmatized has always been devout and inclined, from a very early age, towards penitential practices. Her mother, who provides her with her first religious education and takes her to the penitence tribunal from the age of 7, was nevertheless worried about her too early love of solitude. It does not seem that Marie-Julie was, from her early years, the subject of any mystical manifestations, as is claimed of some other privileged ones of the Lord. At least she has made no such confession. On the contrary, she will claim that she was very naughty when she was little. So naughty, she said, that my mother had to tie me to the leg of the table. In reality, it was because before the age of 3, at Coyot, she once left the house and, walking straight ahead, unaware of the danger, she entered the pond that is now filled in. It was normal for her mother, frightened by the danger she was in, to take the precaution, when she couldn't watch her closely, of tying her to the leg of the table. Very young, she loved to adorn the statue of the Holy Virgin with flowers. She was inventive in making her own instruments of penance. A small cross armed with 17 nails that she pressed against her chest, stones or nails in her clogs, rubbing with nettles. With her, the one who had been a little shepherd in the neighborhood later recounted, with her, you could never play. You always had to recite the rosary. However, she was not very different from her companions, because she lived in a time and environment where faith was lively. During her first communion retreat, she was 10.5 years old, the preacher emphasized the sufferings of the Passion. On the day of absolution, all the children were crying. Only one companion did not cry. Marie-Julie was troubled by this. Later, in an ecstasy, the newly stigmatized revealed that on this day of First Communion, it was her prayer of thanksgiving. It was quite a life program.
My kind Jesus, today you marry my soul. I promise to dedicate my youth and all my years to you, until my death. I want only one husband.
Her greatest desire was to become a nun, but her confessor, Father David, one of the 2 vicars of Blain, thought she did not have the necessary health. She was not suffering from any notable illness, but remained frail. When she was 16, her parents placed her as a servant in an excellent family in the neighboring hamlet, La Milté. She could not finish the year there. She returned home and was content to help the family with farm work. When she was 22 years old, they wanted to provide her with a way to live that suited her abilities. She began an apprenticeship as a seamstress with the Mrs. Perret of Blain. Later, the Mrs. declared that she had a lot of imagination. She suffered from the conversations she was forced to overhear, but she never complained. During his apprenticeship, his mother sent him to pay the doctor in Blain, who was treating his brother Charles, who was seriously injured in the knee. This doctor, who had a good reputation, wanted to take advantage of her. She never ceased to thank the Lord who had allowed her to escape and flee from the claws of the tiger.